48 megapixel sensor in the iPhone 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max is the largest sensor Apple has ever put in one of their phones, but is it any good? That is what we're going to figure out today. Welcome back to another video. My name is Jason, and in today's video, we're going to be looking at the iPhone 14 Pro's cameras strictly from the perspective of a photographer. So let's start off by just talking about the camera module itself. It is still the 3-camera module. It is a slightly bigger than the 13 Pro, so it is a pretty sizable chunk of glass and metal on the back of your phone. But in that, you now get 4 different focal ranges, a 13mm wide angle, a 24mm, a 48mm, and a 77mm lens. The wide angle and the telephoto cameras have been updated, so you get new sensors and new optics giving you better performance, and then you have Apple's brand new 48 megapixel quad pixel sensor. This is the reason why you get an iPhone 14 Pro. With the quad pixel sensor, when you are just shooting regular photos, it is grouping 4 pixels together into one, so you get 12 megapixel photos, but it is downsampled from the 48, so the photos are much sharper, much cleaner, and just much better looking than a standard 12 megapixel sensor. If you do want the full 48 megapixels, you do have to shoot with Apple ProRAW. Apple's made this super simple. In the upper right of the screen, there's a little toggle to turn on and off ProRAW. You just turn that on, and now you're getting full 48 megapixel photos. Another benefit to this is by just taking a 12 megapixel crop from that larger sensor, we are able to get true 12 megapixel files at 48 millimeters. Now let's talk about ProRAW for a second here. Apple hasn't just limited it to the 48 megapixel sensor. It is now available on all 4 different focal ranges. So whether you're shooting wide or telephoto or 48 millimeters or 24 millimeters, you can shoot in Apple ProRAW. But this does come with a bit of a caveat, and that is file space. The 48 megapixel ProRAW files can easily get to 100, 120, even 140 megabytes per file, and that adds up fast. So making sure that you have enough space on your phone to take the photos that you want to take is way more important than it has been with previous iPhones. But even given that kind of large file limitation, being able to shoot RAW regardless of what camera you're using is a cool feature, and I'm glad Apple has included that. Now when it comes to processing the actual RAW file, there is a step in Adobe Lightroom that you do have to do, or else you're not going to be able to process the file correctly. So if we jump into Lightroom here, this is a Canon R6 file. So this, if you're a photographer, you're used to RAW files typically looking similar to this, where you can bring up your exposure, bring down your highlight, raise your shadows. Let's add in a little color here, bring our blues down. So pretty simple. Now if we switch over to the Apple ProRAW, you'll notice that all the kind of adjustments have been done, but none of the sliders have been pulled. So now if you mess with the highlights and the shadows, there's not a ton of latitude here. Everything is all washed out. What you need to do is go up to Profile and switch it to Adobe Color. And once you switch it from ProRAW to Adobe Color, now you're actually editing the RAW file itself. So now you can come down here, bring the exposure, adjust your highlights, add in your color, and now the R6 file and the Apple ProRAW file look very similar, and they act similar. If you don't change that profile, you're not going to actually have the RAW editing capabilities. And that's not to say you need to shoot RAW all the time. I certainly don't. It's a nice feature to have, but a lot of the time I'm just taking regular standard photos, and I think that the iPhone 14 Pro really excels in that as well. The regular photos out of this camera are amazing. You have great dynamic range. I think that there's a good amount of sharpness there. It's not too sharp. You have great color science. I think Apple doesn't get enough credit for their color science. It is some of the best, most natural looking photos out of a phone. The iPhone 14 Pro is definitely a step forward in low light as well. Having a bigger sensor, having bigger pixels definitely makes for cleaner images. Some of these shots are at 1000 ISO, 2000 ISO, still very clean, very little noise, and overall a great low light camera if that's something that you need. And then there's the depth of field. And in my opinion, this is the most impressive thing coming out of the iPhone 14 Pro. The depth of field is real. You get very natural fall off, you get actual out of focus bokeh elements, and all of this without any kind of AI, any portrait mode, anything like that. Even in today's world, the portrait modes on these cameras aren't great. And so to have a big sensor that gives real, actual depth of field is impressive. And this might be my favorite feature of this phone. And that brings us to who exactly is this for? I think if you have an older iPhone, I came from the iPhone 10, it hit that point in its life where the battery life was terrible, the processor was struggling to just do everyday tasks, and so I needed a new phone. Luckily, Apple just released the iPhone 14 Pro, and so it was just a natural move for me. But I think if you have an iPhone 13 Pro or even an iPhone 12, upgrading from those to this might be a little harder of a sell. I don't really think that this is a necessary upgrade if you have a 13. If you are a content creator and your job is creating content for the internet on the phone, if you maybe do YouTube and film your YouTube videos on your phone, if you shoot with brands, more and more brands now want their content actually shot on phones. So I could see if you are a content creator, having the latest and greatest phone can definitely help your business. And I think lastly, if you are somebody that maybe is too afraid to make that initial purchase, buy that first mirrorless camera or DSLR, that is a big investment and you have to buy a phone anyway. So buying an iPhone 14 Pro with a really nice camera that has the RAW capabilities, has depth of field, maybe that is your push to get that mirrorless camera down the road. And so if you're interested in photography, this makes a lot of sense, but it is definitely not a replacement for a mirrorless camera. Mirrorless cameras and DSLRs have their place in the photography world, and I would never be trading in an R6 to solely shoot on my iPhone 14. But that being said, there is a cliche out there that the best camera is the camera that is on you. And for me and for you and probably most people, that is your phone. It is always on you. So having a camera that has 4 different focal ranges, has RAW capabilities, has real depth of field, I can't complain about that. I hope I was able to answer some questions regarding the iPhone 14 Pro and how the cameras perform for photos. If you guys have any further questions, leave those in a comment down below and I'll try my best to answer them. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in another one.